Welcome to CISO Online Manufacturing, a value-packed webinar brought to you live by CXO Sync. I'm your host and moderator, Joseph Wolfgram. For those of you I'm meeting for the first time, I'm a 35-year veteran of the IT industry, serving as CTO for multi-billion-dollar healthcare systems. Since retiring from the full-time office, I spend time as a professional speaker, podcast host, and strategic advisor in healthcare and education. I'm hosting this event today from South Padre Island, Texas, just down the road from SpaceX Boca Chica, where we're getting ready for the fourth launch of a prototype Mars Starship pretty soon. So I'm looking forward to that. I hope you are tuned in today from someplace just as nice. If you're working from the office or from your home office, I'm honored to bring this live event directly to your screen today. Now, in just a moment, we're going to kick it off with our expert panelists here on the virtual stage. But first, I want to mention that today's event is sponsored by Darktrace, the world's leading cyber AI company and the creator of autonomous response technology. This event is also made possible by Onapsis, protects the mission-critical applications that run the global economy from the core to the cloud. The Onapsis platform uniquely delivers actionable insight, secure change, automated governance, and continuous monitoring for critical systems like ERP, CRM, PLM, HCM, SCM, and BI applications from leading vendors such as SAP, Oracle, Salesforce, and others. That's onapsis.com. Okta. They're the leading independent provider of identity for the enterprise. The Okta Identity Cloud enables organizations to securely connect the right people to the right technologies at the right time. With over 7,000 pre-built integrations to applications and infrastructure providers, Okta customers can easily and securely use the best technologies for their business. More than 10,000 organizations, including JetBlue, Nordstrom, Slack, T-Mobile, Tech Data, Teach for America, and Twilio trust Okta to help protect the identities of their workforces and customers. Abnormal Security is a next-generation cloud email security company protecting enterprises from targeted business email compromise attacks. Learn how they do it at abnormalsecurity.com. And TrueFort. Their Fortress platform takes a unique adaptive trust approach to application environment security, which delivers radical reductions in your overall application attack surface, cloud, hybrid, virtual, and legacy. And this next level protection is designed to leverage your existing agents without application changes. Check out truefort.com for more. We certainly want to thank all of our sponsors for making this webinar possible for all of us here today. Oh, and I also want to tell you that we have a special guest joining us later on. David Mason, Director of Enterprise Security at Darktrace, is going to share his insights working with clients all over the world on IT and OT security. You're going to want to stick around for that conversation. Now it's time to get the stage set for that infamous CISO Predictions Panel. Joining me on stage today are some of the industry's top thought leaders in information and cybersecurity. First up, I'd like to introduce Carlton Beard. He's the Vice President, Enterprise Infrastructure and Cybersecurity at Shaw Industries. If you want to learn more about any of the panelists today, check out the chat tab for bios and links to their profiles. Carlton, welcome to the virtual stage.
Thank you for welcoming me, Joseph.
I'm glad you could be here. Now, next up, I want to introduce Arun D'Souza. He is the Chief Information Security Officer and CPO at Nextier. Arun, come on down. Now, I want to say CPO stands for Chief Privacy Officer, but I'm going to have him confirm that in just a minute.
Yes, good afternoon, Joseph. Glad to be here. And you're absolutely right. Chief Information Security and Privacy Officer, and from Nextier, and I live in Troy, Michigan.
Ah, excellent. Well, thanks for joining us today, Arun. It's a pleasure to have you. And rounding out today's CISO panel is Mandy Huth. Did I say that right? Did I get her last name right? Mandy Huth. She's the Vice President of Cybersecurity at Kohler Company out of Wisconsin. Mandy, how did I do on your name?
You stuttered a little, but you got it. Yes.
All right.
It's all good.
Thanks so much for being here. It's a fabulous panel we've got lined up. But I also want to thank each of our live audience members for joining today. You know, you've tuned in to gain valuable insights and knowledge, but not just as a listener. We invite you to ask questions and get interactive with us here on the CISO panel. To the right side of your screen, you can see options to chat, submit questions to the panel, and vote in our poll, where you'll get to crown one of our panelists as the CISO Online Manufacturing IT Psychic. That's hashtag IT Psychic for you social media fans out there. Now, with those logistics and introductions taken care of, let's get the predictions for 2021 started. We've asked each of our panelists to gaze into their crystal ball and look ahead over the next 6 to 12 months to make a prediction about what they see is in store for our industry. You're going to decide which prediction you believe is most likely to come true when you vote in that poll a little later on. Carlton, if you're ready, we'll begin with your prediction.
Okay, I had considered things that would be shifting over the next handful of years and thought about the fact that something that's already started and is going to continue going is the transition from what we have considered the walled network, the walled garden of the past. That is totally disintegrating on us as we go through time, because more kinds of devices, IoT devices, smartphones. We have a truck fleet and we have all kinds of devices showing up in those trucks now. They're all beginning to be attached to our business network as well as to the cloud. So as we go through time, more and more of those walled garden concepts that we had in the past that made things a little easier for security are not going to be there anymore. So the philosophy is having to shift from my perspective to protect every device everywhere all the time, because it's beginning to be that you can't expect things to be protected behind some kind of a wall.
You know, that's a fabulous prediction, Carlton. I want to summarize it real quick for our live audience. You're telling us that companies are going to expand security protections to basically every device, everywhere, as those traditional network boundaries continue to dissolve. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's correct.
And I think about it in the manufacturing context. You're right. How many hundreds or thousands of devices do we have connected in our logistics systems, our manufacturing, operational technology systems? And the lines between IT and OT are blurring a little more these days as well, making the security challenge even greater. So,
an interesting data point to back that up is we have 3 times more IP addresses than we have employees.
You got 3 devices to every employee in your organization. Yeah, wow. That's an interesting statistic, and probably going to get that ratio even higher as time goes on. All right, excellent prediction, Carlton. Thank you so much for sharing it. Next up, we'll go to Arun. What's your prediction, sir?
Thank you, Joseph. I'll give a little preamble and then I'll make the prediction, try to be quick. So at present in the manufacturing industry, we have entered the era of the 4th industrial revolution. Therefore, companies like ours are leveraging IoT devices at scale to increase manufacturing efficiency, reduce cycle time, and enact cost savings. So amidst this backdrop, the Internet of Things, or the IoT, will be a game changer and business enabler as digital manufacturing accelerates amidst Industry 4.0. However, the explosive growth of the IoT brings a variety of risks as IoT devices manifest myriad flaws. And also, when these things are deployed, IT, OT organizations don't always talk. And some of the vulnerabilities manifest in IoT devices are lack of patching, lack of data encryption, potential for static credentials, poorly designed application programming interface security, and so on. And on the flip side of it, supply chain security is also mission critical. There have been some high profile breaches recently, but the pathway through the Internet of Things also exists as it spreads across the enterprise. And the risks of a data breach from supply chain attack include but are not limited to things such as operational downtime, impaired fulfillment, loss of company trust or reputation, penalties or fines, a bottom line cost impact, intellectual property loss, which is amplified when you consider the particular convergence of the security and privacy risk nexus of the IoT. With that preamble, here's my prediction. The Internet of Things, or the IoT, though a game changer, will be the root cause of a major security/privacy breach and or a supply chain compromise?
You know, it's a scary prediction, and one that I hope doesn't come true, but I think a very good prediction. Like we were just talking about, there are so many of these devices connected to our networks now. I've got a quick question for you, Arun. What about 5G? How does that play in? Are these IoT devices gonna ride on that bandwidth? Is that getting more involved in operational technology? What are you seeing happen there?
It can quite happen because sometimes the Ethernet and LAN cables don't work so well, or even the classical Wi-Fi. So sometimes because of dead drops in manufacturing, you have these outside connections to the cell phone carriers, which today are 4G and tomorrow will be 5G. And the 5G, there's a lot of attention to that. Who's going to supply? Where are the routers made? They may be made in I guess, certain countries that are considered high risk. I won't name any. So how do those networks work? So you're right. I think now when you factor that in manufacturing, they might continue to leverage 5G, transition to 4G. It actually amplifies the risk of the IoT, because now not only do you have the sort of castle and moat of your internal network or the internal Wi-Fi, but now you're exposing IoT to sort of an unsecured 5G connection. That's a great observation and question, Joseph.
Okay, well, that's what I was afraid I was going to hear. But, we really need to use whatever avenue we can, pipe, wireless, to get the job done. And that is just going to expand the risk surface even greater. And that's what I was afraid you're going to say. Let me summarize your prediction for the live audience. You're saying that the Internet of Things is going to be the root cause of a major privacy breach and or supply chain compromise as digital manufacturing accelerates amidst this fourth industrial revolution. Did I get it?
Yes, perfect. Thank you, Joseph.
All right. Thank you, Arun. Excellent prediction. Mandy, we are to you. What do you see in your crystal ball?
So I couldn't agree more with Carlton and Arun about some of the big threats coming our way. I've taken a little bit of a different approach because I tend to find that in the industry, the biggest thing that I am concerned about is credential theft. And, it's prevalent because every single asset that touches our network, whether cloud or internal, is at the behest of our credentials. So, with my prediction, I'll give you a little bit of background on it. My prediction is within 3 to 5 years, password-only authentication will be obsolete. And that is due to the propagation of open standards such as WebAuthn and FIDO2, federated identities, and machine learning-based real-time access checks. So if you think about it, any process, it's people, process, and technology in that order. So in terms of people, you have to give them just-in-time access. It reduces the amount of time bad actors actually have to get access and to move laterally in your environment. If you look at process, federated identity allows us to link a person's electronic identity and attributes to pre-approved policies and rules. So we have process. And WebAuthn is really the technology enabler that gives us a consistent mechanism to apply things to supported browsers and platforms in a consistent way. So I think I've looked across the people, process, technology, and if you're doing password-only authentication in 3 years, you're probably behind the ball.
Oh, I think that's a great prediction. So you're saying over the next 3 to 5 years, anytime I authenticate using a password only, that's going to be a thing of the past. They're either going to have multi-factor authentication. Now, do you see passwords going away in that same time period? This is just an add-on question, but what do you see happening there?
Everyone's striving for passwordless. But truly, when you move towards passwordless, all you're doing is you're adding that, whether biometric or mobile authentication, along with a PIN. It's really about multi-factor. So getting rid of passwords, passphrases is absolutely a capability if you have the right identities and machine learning to validate who you are, and using the right biometrics or mobile applications, that second factor to add to that. I think I'm working on it. So and I've heard from lots of my peers that they are working on it as well.
Yeah, I think as a technology user, we are up to here with passwords and would like to see them go away. But I think there's going to be a challenge in getting people to accept that they don't have a password anymore too. So it's going to take some time to make that transition.
Lots of change management. Yes.
Yeah, good observation. Absolutely. Okay, well, we are going to open up our poll question now so that you can see the predictions online and cast your vote for which one you think is most likely to come true. And we'll check that out at the end of our program today to see who we crown the IT psychic. While those votes come pouring in from the live audience, we've got a couple of sponsor questions for the panelists. If you're ready, I'll throw the first one to Mandy. And this question is from Onapsis, and they want to know, where do mission critical applications like HR, financial, supply chain, CRM, ERP that run on SAP or Oracle fall on your radar? And how are you currently protecting them from increasing cyber attacks?
So I find it really interesting that Onapsis put, I can tell you, we talk about CRM and ERP, and in our particular environment, one is in the cloud and one is not. Oh. And so I have to protect them differently, actually. And ultimately it gets back to foundational security considerations. But I truly think where mission critical applications come into play, I think sometimes we get so ahead of ourselves, especially in the cloud. I think we do a really good job when we have on-premise applications that we have a solid dev, test, and production environment. I find as we move to the cloud, we get a little weak on that, right? Like we're like, oh, we don't really need all three environments, and that's a real problem. So, security is about the triads: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And so I work really closely with teams to make sure they have legitimate environments that are copies, right? Also, I see tons of people not making sure that their environments are copies or replicated. And so they don't match. And so how are you testing before you go to production? So that's really important. And then the other thing is, things happen, we all know it. And without being the purveyor of, the sky is falling, I much rather say, if the sky falls, do we have a good backup plan? Do we have a disaster recovery or response plan? So making sure that those mission critical applications have a solid and practiced way to get back to work. And that, that's really critical. And one last piece of that is, if that's really critical, I don't maybe need every piece of data in each of those applications, making sure that you classify the data so that you're only, you're saving money, where you can, and you're only really worried about the data that keeps the business running.
Yeah, no, that's a great observation there too, and I like the fact that you brought up, disruption response. When something gets disrupted for whatever reason, do we have a great response to it? I think there's a really well thought out approach to how you're protecting those mission critical applications. Thank you, Mandy. Arun, I saw you nodding your head there a little bit. You were getting what she was putting down. How are you protecting your mission critical applications from these ever increasing cyber attacks?
Yeah, I think Mandy talked about the people, process, and technology, but it's really about deploying a layered security architecture spanning the application, services, and infrastructure tiers, along with the people, process, technology, which is the flip side of it, really, because it's not any one thing that can do it. It's like a potpourri of technology along with the people and process, just like Mandy said.
Sure, absolutely. Carlton, what are your thoughts? Are you protecting these critical applications from cyber attacks in your organization?
Yeah, it's something Mandy mentioned about the fact that people's guard goes down when they go to SaaS because they think that it's all handled. You don't have to worry about it anymore. There's a lot of mythology wrapped up in the idea that if it's in the cloud, you don't have to worry about anything to do with operations or resiliency or any of those components of your architecture design. So it is a real challenge to get business leaders to respect that you still have to do the same kind of homework, the especially around information security, to make sure that you don't wind up with regrets because you didn't think about something that can cost you a breach. And a lot of times it's negligent, not necessarily intentional negligence, but just a mistake made by an associate who didn't realize what they were doing when they, in a SaaS environment, create a share, as an example, where they're opening it up to others or to public view. And those are things that are more and more common in those kinds of environments. And they kind of sneak up on you because that insider activity is something you don't anticipate. We're looking for those external threat actors trying to break in. But the biggest risks sometimes are from people just making mistakes. Not so much intentional and not by design. It's just something they did that they shouldn't have done. And if you don't have the right controls in place to help prevent that, number one, and to mitigate it if you do have it happen, then you wind up with problems that result from that kind of an environment. So the things you do, a lot of it has to do with awareness. You have to get people in the mindset of I've got to be risk attentive and think about the things that my actions can lead to that could cause some kind of a problem for the company, either in the form of a system going down because I've made the mistake of doing something that causes it to fail, or in terms of releasing some kind of information that shouldn't have been released. Those are pretty common things now. And then you have to button up all the things you have to do to keep the bad guys out too. That you can't neglect that.
Can't forget about that, but you make some really good points in your response there. And, unfortunately, there's more and more evidence of what you're saying, that it's a human error often that causes the biggest problems. So reading the headlines today, as I'm sure all of the CISOs here were as well, about the web-based security camera company that got hacked recently, and that sounds like those credentials were just found on the public internet, and that's a really unfortunate thing affecting many people. I'd love to have a conversation about just that, but we got to keep things moving here. Carlton, I'm going to stick with you. Okta would like to know, how are you currently collaborating with external partners and contractors that may require access to your business applications?
Oh, yeah, but that's a multi-layered challenge. It depends on what the application is and whether it was written 20 years ago or 2 years ago sometimes. So your ability to collaborate is governed by the methods that you can use to create access. We're fortunate in that many years ago, we went to G Suite, or Google, what's now called Google Workspace. And that opened up a lot of avenues around collaboration across companies with regard to people being able to view and work with content. But when it comes to the systems that I was referring to in our manufacturing processes, sometimes those are written in technologies that are very, very narrowly accessible. You have to create tunnels in a firewall. You have to create remote desktop capability. There's all kinds of characters that you get into in terms of the way that they have to be manipulated externally. One of the most important things we're doing is only granting those kinds of accesses as they are needed. We have a 24-hour operations center, and the suppliers will always say, well, we need this access turned on all the time, every day, for all of our people. And we say, no, we're not doing that. If you need this access, we have a 24-hour operations center that can get it for you in real time. That's the way we protect those types of activities when it comes to the external support. And there's more of it as more IoT devices show up that are produced by what I call complex OEMs that provide service as well as the product. So there's more and more times that you have to create some kind of a entryway for these external partners to do the things they need to do, either occasionally or on a regular basis. But we are restricting that to only as needed. That's one of the biggest changes we've made in the last 12 months.
Oh, I love that. If you already have the investment in a 24-hour operations center, that is one of the best security uses I've heard, of turning that access on only when they need it and right back off when those external service providers are done. I think that's a really fantastic approach. Mandy, how about you? How are you dealing with external partners and contractors that need access to your business applications?
Yeah, I think that, so love what Carlton said. I would love to do more just-in-time access in my environment. In the absence of that, or the not having the resources to do that, I really take two approaches and one from an enterprise perspective and one from a manufacturing perspective. We're working really hard, and I know there is administration with this, but a lot of companies that I know and peers that I know, we have one VPN profile, right? And so you either get access or you don't to our enterprise environment, and that's just not a good approach. And so we're working really hard to create multiple profiles for our VPN, and call it network segmentation if you will, right? But really segmenting that lateral movement so you only get access to what you need. And the second piece of that, again, in absence of exact time, we are creating much more self-service in our remote access capabilities. So giving those vendors on the manufacturing floor the ability to self-serve after we do one initial setup, they become the arbiters, but again, really closing in that gap to this is what they need access to. That's all they need access to, and making it easy for them to give people the right access at the right time with appropriate auditing capabilities. So hopefully by making it easy, it actually enhances people's willingness to do security.
Yeah, and you probably have the ability to monitor that access as well. I think that's a pretty good. I mean, if you don't have a 24-hour operations center to turn things on and off in real time, those are some pretty good steps you can take. It sounds like you're almost restricting that vendor's access to just what they need. So even if there were a bad actor or they compromised on that third-party site, they're not going to be able to do much outside of that sandbox, really. Is that right?
That's right. And you'll see a theme. It's don't let them in. That's identity, which was my prediction. 2, don't let them move around. It's number 2. And if they do happen to move around, certainly don't let them out with anything, which we'll talk about, data loss prevention. Those are the 3 keys for me. If we can do those 3 things, we've got a pretty solid Venn diagram for solid security.
Yeah, and I like how you've got things boiled down to like 3s, because that's easy to remember, easy to think about when you're considering a new vendor partnership or whatever, a new security technology. You kind of keep that model in mind. That makes it nice and easy. Thanks for sharing that with us.
Yeah.
Arun, what do you have to say about this?
Well, whether suppliers, contractors, external partners, in on-prem, off-prem, remote. Nowadays, everyone's remote. I know that. It's real centered on identity. So it all starts first with the, identity framework that pins together access to anytime, anywhere, authorized access to both on-prem and cloud solutions, things like single sign-on and robust multi-factor, along with the business processes, because the other thing we're moving towards is the notion of zero trust. Whether it's for people inside the company or outside the company, moving towards each connection on the risk-based approach, right? So whether it's a contractor or whatever, if you want to be able to secure your data based on the proper data permissions, the proper access, but do it on a risk-based basis, right? And so I think moving towards a zero trust approach along with identity and software-defined perimeter can help solve the contract access problem as well. The DLP problem, the mandate, I won't talk about that today. That's too complex.
Right.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned zero trust, because I think that is another real key puzzle piece here to this whole cyber defense strategy that we all need to keep in mind around these ever expanding attack surfaces that we have. So thanks for mentioning that. I'm going to stick with you for a moment, Arun, and get this question from Abnormal Security. They're talking about the rise of email attacks being sent from compromised accounts, both internal and from trusted partners and suppliers. It's a real problem. How are you detecting incidents of account compromise today?
Well, 2 things. At the first level, just like we have an identity framework, we also have an email security boundary solution. I won't name the name, but it provides enterprise protection and targeted attack protection to minimize and eliminate incidents. So it takes care of malware through sandboxing, compromised credential, looks at the domain, the validity of the domain through DMARC, and just all those potpourri of things. But you can do everything you want like that and all this AI ML, but at the end of the day, things are still going to get through. And that's why it's very important to leverage end user training and awareness to educate and enlist folks as the first line of defense. I mean, that's paramount. You can put all the technology you want, because otherwise you're not. And let me explain why. For example, last year we had an example where in one of our countries there was a big dollar amount that came through a supposed supplier, right? A legitimate email address or email security boundary didn't know. Yet through the security awareness and training, we're giving them some tips that something is not adding up about this stuff, right? And it turned out ultimately when we did the after action review, the account of the person had been hacked. So everything looked okay, but it was not okay. And the only thing that saved us because the one or two people remembered the training principles and went to it. So anyway, it's a combination, is the long and short of it.
Oh, that's excellent. And you're right. That is the final safety net of defense after all the technology's been deployed and configured, is that, wetware on the other side of the keyboard that's making decisions on things, and that requires continuous training. Yeah, it's a really good point.
I got nothing to add. You don't even need to come to me. He hit them, right? Great. I think the email gateways are solid, right? I mean, there's a number of vendors out there that do a really good job, and they've upped their game to really give you not just data, but some analytics. And it reduces your threat surface quite substantially, but ultimately your people have to be able to recognize when something's just not right. So you hit it spot on, Brune.
Absolutely. Carlton, do you have anything to add to this detecting incidents of account compromise? You doing anything different?
The most important thing we've done lately has been a very, very broad phishing campaign, or I should say anti-phishing campaign, to make sure people understood how to detect whether an email was potentially phishing. That proved to be very beneficial because initially we were seeing a click-through rate close to 30% on those phishing tests. So when you start doing that and you realize just how exposed you were, it's refreshing to move through time and see how those click-through rates can fall into the single digits. Obviously, the better you get at it, the less risk you have, but you're never going to hit zero. It's one of those things where on a given day, your best person is going to succumb to seeing an email and thinking, "Oh, that looks legitimate. Let me check on that." Click.
Yep.
And
can I add one thing to that, Carlton? One thing that I think it's really important that we did here at Kohler is, as you said, everybody gets them. I've clicked one, right? Raise your hand. It's absolutely true. They're really good, right? And so what we really focused on with our phishing training, rather than, yes, we still do general phishing, we started trending who are our chronic clickers, right? So the person that clicks once and says, "Oh, crud," and reports, those aren't the people I worry about. It's the people that consistently click through. And we did very specialized training for them to say, you have got to stop doing this. And really giving them some additional, because they're our risk, right? Because they're multipliers.
And we've even had the conversations about taking disciplinary actions with people who, after the training, don't get it, because sadly there are people who they're just prone to click those tests, and that's an indication that they're not being taken care of with the company's assets. So we haven't done that. But we have had some conversations about what if we continue to have some certain people, and there's only a handful, who just never seem to get the importance of being careful with those clicks.
And go ahead, Arun.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing that I forgot to say earlier. Where training and awareness is very important, because today we are not within the quote unquote castle and moat. We're at home, and I do it myself. I check my personal email, right? Yeah. And business email compromise can come through any kind of email. And so the training that you give to them is even more valuable now, because they can detect through probably weaker non-corporate email systems, to make sure they don't click. So both Carlton and Mandy onto that. Click protection, both in your personal life and professional life, is important. The line has blurred so much since the past year.
That's right.
Yeah, really good points. Excellent point.
Can I add one more thing? I know we want to keep it moving, but
sure, go ahead.
The other thing, if you have an email gateway, I just thought of this because we were talking about chronic clickers. The other side of that is most email gateway. So my advice to our audience is check your email gateway for the capability to identify very attacked people.
Oh.
They're the other side of your big attack surface. Those high profile people. and you can actually run reports on how much they're being attacked. And again, that very specific training, because they're another big circle in your attack surface, and make sure that they understand how people are trying to get to them so that they're more aware as well. So
I like that.
product clickers on one side, very attacked people on the other side.
Excellent point, Mandy. Integrating the identity framework with the email security boundary can get an additional layer of protection. Well said.
Exactly.
Oh, great advice. Thanks for sharing that. Now, the unfortunate part about all this is it just takes one user, one click, one time to cause a big problem. So getting this point across, and maybe even to the point of disciplinary action, as Carlton mentioned, is what it's going to take moving forward to keep everybody safe. Now, Mandy, I'm going to stick with you. Go ahead.
Okay, but Joseph, I'm gonna challenge you. Sorry.
Okay.
It does only take one, but if that one person learns to report, then we can stop it. So,
great point.
Instead of the punitive, it's like, I don't care. I'm not going to yell at you. Tell me so I can stop it. It's when people are afraid because, I did that.
Yeah.
And I don't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
If you make it punitive, they're afraid. If you say, just report it, we'll take care of it, we can stop it. Much better.
I do like the positive aspect of that
Can I jump into the bandwagon too? So both of the things have value, the positive, and sometimes people do it again and again. But one thing one can think about is gamification, right? Leaderboards and making it fun, right? And so you say, okay, so there's just something to add to set the target.
I like that. Yeah, gamification and positive, trusting relationships with employees is always the first choice, obviously. So a great reminder, Mandy. Thank you. I'm going to stick with you for this final question from Truefort. How do you protect your application environment today? And would you be interested in a solution that offered real-time, automated self-protection for your applications? What's your thought on that?
Well, that's like asking me if I would mind winning the lottery.
Right.
I felt like it was kind of a loaded question. So kudos to Truefort for phrasing it that way. Well done. So in terms of application environment, again, I think as Carlton called it, our borderless data it's hard to do because it's not just on premise. It's not just in the cloud. It's hybrid cloud and it's everywhere. So it's not an easy thing. And so, what I'm really looking for as I look at my applications and, really shifting left to make sure any code development is secure so that I don't become a bottleneck, right? So that's really important to me, and making those gates part of the process so that we're not really gates. We're kind of like those, what are they called? The cattle grates, right? We don't stop traffic. We just want you to be careful as you walk across it. And so that's really important. And so we're doing that piece. And the big thing is visibility. But visibility, and I've mentioned this before, visibility is huge and it's just data. So what I'm looking for really and what I'm working on is how do I reduce the noise enough to be able to make decisions about what is relevant concern. And so again, it goes back to somebody's on the other side of the keyboard. So if I can use machine learning to reduce the noise and find things that are relevant to my environment so that I have a manageable list of things to look at, that's how I'm going to best protect my application environment.
Yeah, great thoughts. Arun, what do you think about protecting the application environment?
We don't do a lot of application development in IT, but in the engineering side of the house, because of steering systems and whatnot, and even web apps, they do a lot of it. And the philosophy for me, the goal should always be to enact continuous vulnerability assessment remediation throughout the software development lifecycle, along with risk dashboarding. So if there's a high risk, application risk can be identified and fixed, ASAP, maybe an extreme programming approach, because you don't want them to creep because they tend to build upon themselves. And I'd be interested in people like that just to learn about.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, great thoughts. And Carlton, are you protecting your application environment today? Or do you have it fully automated and self-protection?
You won the lottery? What?
No, actually, I was thinking when Mandy was talking there, applications themselves are part of our security framework, because the interesting thing about the way applications, for us, the way they work, is they give you finite access to data. So if I go into an application panel, I can only see the things that application's built to present to me. One of the things that on that principle, don't let them in, we like to not allow global access to the back-end data systems if we can avoid it. So the applications themselves become gateways to limit the ability for individuals to be able to see the data. Now, something about the way you and I was sitting here wondering, getting applications to be secure can be a real challenge. One of the things that we've done that has been kind of a bread and butter thing for us is to have secure code audits on a regular basis. So every quarter we pick a system and we go through the process of auditing that system, looking for software vulnerabilities. And then it becomes a very public thing when we finish the audit. And of course, it's embarrassing to some of the developers sometimes, but it teaches the rest of the development community things that you shouldn't do. Those weird things like SQL injections that some developers don't really understand what that even means. But you can have a conversation about that because you found an instance of it that's very tangible. And I think that's probably one of the more important things that we do. Other than the back-end security things that you prevent access from being too broad or too deep, those are a big part of the application security as well. Encrypt everything. And we've made a decision. We're going to quit trying to decide whether to encrypt that data and that data and that data. We're looking at a encrypt everything approach. It's that whole protect everything everywhere. If it doesn't break the bank in terms of the cost, go ahead and encrypt it, because at some point in time, it may be PII, it may be PHI, it may be PCI, it could be SBI, or there's all kinds of different kinds of special information now, and somewhere in that data set, there's probably going to be some of it.
Yeah, excellent point, Carlton. Thank you. We got a couple questions from the live audience. I want to get in here real quick. The first is for Mandy, and Keith is wondering, how are you developing the segmentation policies that you talked about? That seems to be a challenging part of rolling out microsegmentation.
Yes, absolutely. So great question, Keith. Honestly, I'm going to use, and this is not mine, but progress before perfection. Network segmentation is like boiling the ocean, or my opportunity to win the lottery. It's just, it's going to take lots of tickets and lots of time and lots of trying. So what we've really taken the approach, a risk-based approach, is what are our most important applications, and how do we want to protect those? I will tell you, without getting into Microsoft Red Forest, which is very interesting, by all means, if you think back to what Arun said around zero trust, if you really wanted to get adventurous, kind of, I'll call it next gen thinking, we've talked about actually certain devices only need to talk to other certain devices. So you could actually shut that device down to a zero trust principle and only give access to the devices that need it, versus segmentation. It's device to device segmentation. So that's another approach we're taking. So it's kind of a hybrid, right? So we're not trying to boil the ocean. We're determining some very critical things, much like we do, with our DMZs, right? We know what we're going to put in there. That's a segment that we protect. Okay, what's next? But then also that zero trust principle for devices that really don't need to talk to a lot of things. They might not need to be in their own segment. They just need zero trust access principles.
Yeah, that's great. Arun, did you have a thought on that?
Yeah, it's funny because, the IoT and identity, as you know, is one of my #1 passions. So this time I stayed away from prediction identity, but you're spot on, Mandy. I think the notion of zero trust and software-defined perimeter and device identity lifecycle, when you tie all these things together along with the risk-based approach, I think you're spot on, and that's what's needed. And people still haven't made the connection. They think of all these things with people, but devices are going to be outnumbering people on the internet, right? We need to start thinking of the trifecta of identity, zero trust, software-defined perimeter, enact that, what I would say identity, and look at it, at least with people, the physical side of the identity, which is person, device, location, but then you also have the logical side is attribute, behavior, context, role pattern-based access control. So how do you take that principle and apply it to the IoT, right? Along with what all you said. So
Yeah, great thought. Now, we got one more question from Tony. He said, Arun had mentioned unpatched systems as being a cybersecurity issue. In concert, how are the panelists discovering and providing proactive security for EOL operating systems, end-of-life operating systems, and hard-coded passwords in applications? Thoughts on that?
I can answer the first part of the question. The second one, I don't have an answer, but we recently invested in, a asset discovery and characterization platform that any internet connected thing like a laptop, anything, it'll scan it, it'll discover it has IP connected, and it'll tell you a risk dashboard at any given time, what level, whether it has a WannaCry, whether patches are out. And so I think, very important for IoT security to have a platform like that, because at the scale it's coming, you can't be auditing your spreadsheets anymore, right? You can't run around and check boxes. You've got to have automation, automated discovery, device classification, and policy enforcement automatically, and remediation. Hope that helps.
Yeah, Arun, I think it's spot on. We can talk tech all day. You have to have a good process, but there are a lot of tools actually out there that do this. If you have solid software asset management or just asset management, CMDBs are hard, right? But if you get the right things and the right discovery tools, it's an investment, but it's well worth it. And with a good discovery tool and report, you can identify those pretty well. I think the other piece of that is convince your business that getting to them before end of life is important, and that requires a resource to look at those reports. Too many times companies buy bright and shiny, beautiful tech and don't have the resources to keep it maintained or to administer it well. So it doesn't matter if I have a bright, shiny Tesla in my garage if I never know how to drive it, or I have no one to drive it, right? It doesn't mean no good.
Yeah.
So make sure that your business understands that technology won't run itself, though, right? You need the resources to make it work for them.
If I add something to excellent idea, Andy, the thing that we do here is, and I think Joseph heard it before, the power of federation across the length, depth, and breadth of the enterprise ecosystem. Everybody should be part of the security program, right? So especially in IoT, partnering with the manufacturing, etc. It can't just be any one person's problem. So I think relationship management and the business process of working together, I think you said that earlier, Mandy, it's really a great thing to do. So everyone has to be in the cyber battle. It's not an IT problem, right?
And that is a great point to land the discussion on right there. Very powerful. And I just want to thank each of the panelists for sharing their insights and experience with us. They're really great notes here. I've got a whole pad full of them just from this small discussion. So thank you so much. What I want to do now is invite David Mason onto the stage to continue the conversation. David is the Director of Enterprise Security at Darktrace and has over 2 decades of experience working in fast-moving security and intelligence environments in the UK, Canada, and worldwide. David, welcome to the virtual stage.
Hey, hi, everyone. Just to follow up there, I've been taking loads of notes as well.
Yeah, it's a great discussion, hasn't it, Ben?
Really enjoyed that panel. It was very, very interesting indeed.
Absolutely. So, David, 2020 must have had some amazing new security attacks and technology for us to learn about. I mean, bad actors are so brilliant and creative in coming up with these new attack strategies and viruses for us to defend against. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, there was an awful lot of stuff going on in 2020. Nearly all of it actually driven by COVID-19. Threat attackers using COVID-19 primarily to deliver their attacks. But in terms of exciting new attacks, there weren't really any, to be honest with you. They were pretty much the same attacks we saw in 2019, but there was just an awful lot more of them. The scale of the size of attacks just went up and up and up. However, what we did see was a lot of ingenuity in how to deliver those attacks. One I would highlight straight away was people understand how ransomware works. Well, people like us understand how ransomware works, but we're now seeing ransomware being applied to OT technology, ransoming operations, not just your data. And the other one was people started talking about supply chain attacks I am going to reference the biggest one in a second, but first to say that, again, supply chain attacks have been around for a long time. They didn't just suddenly turn up last year. Maybe some of you remember what happened to CCleaner a couple of years ago, where one of their updates got poisoned and the way we went. Then we had that big supply chain attack. What was interesting about that was that the threat actor, whoever it was, okay, wanted access to the American economy effectively and the American government, and had a choice to individually go after one or thousands of them, or actually find an organization that already had that access and then got in and poisoned their access, their updates, in order to achieve that access themselves, and put themselves in a position where now they could probably rock up to just about any organization in America, and there's a reasonable chance the backdoor that they've installed is already there waiting for them. So that was the kind of clever ingenuity we saw from threat attackers last year.
Scary stuff. So really not new technology, just new ways of using it and deploying it and exploiting. Yeah, pretty scary. But now I understand that a lot more IT is being used in the operational technology, the OT space, and this makes sense for efficiency, cost control, but with this convergence of IT and OT, is it also causing an increase in security risk?
Yeah, absolutely. Remember, all technology is dual use. There's good and there's bad and absolutely everything. Yeah, IT and OT convergence, bigger issue, particularly for the OT side rather than the IT. IT is going to make OT so much more efficient, so much more useful to us, absolutely. But you've got to remember that what the IT world then brings to OT is that world of misery and pain called cyber that comes with it, okay? And you're bringing that onto OT. Now, in the past, OT was fire-gapped. By the way, kiss goodbye to that, folks. The days of fire gap in your OT are long gone, been gone for quite a while. But you're bringing that increasing agility, the increasing interconnectedness of IT to OT. OT, to be honest about it, was not designed for any of that. It was designed with safety in mind, but that's not the same as security. So that world of pain that cyber has inflicted on IT, that's what you mean by IT-OT convergence, and you're bringing it over onto the OT side. And we saw that in attacks last year. Biggest example would be the ECANS attack, and yes, folks, that is snake spelt backwards, was when they were able to pivot from IT over onto the OT with a OT-specific attack in mind, because it was actually designed to start destroying some of the safety functions in OT, and you saw that last year.
Yikes, scary stuff. Now, these trust attacks seem to be a particular concern today. Have these also impacted today's operational IT networks?
Yes, trust attacks are very, very insidious types of attacks. These are the ones that attack the integrity side of the CIA formula, and they're absolutely horrible because on the IT side, if you're a hospital and you suddenly can't trust those lab tests, that's the end of everything, okay? You've got to start again. You can't trust anything. The same thing applies on the OT side. The whole idea of industrial control systems is to control the industrial systems. The old idea of SCADA, supervisory control and data analytics, is to trust the information that you're receiving that helps you to run and manage the operational facility. And when you've now got attacks that starts fiddling with the figures, it can lead to some real damage, whether it's caused by the OT operators themselves or by the threat actors who are actually looking to do that. And by the way, we saw some of that quite a few years ago. Maybe some of you remember the blast furnace in Germany, where the threat actors got on and they just turned the temperature down by a couple of degrees. And that was the end of the blast furnace.
Wow. Yeah, it doesn't take much of a problem to really disrupt the entire operational, chain of events, or, and what's scary about that is something like that could go unnoticed for a while. It's just a small change. It's not a system got knocked offline, and there's a monitor's not going to pick that up necessarily as a down system or something like that. It's pretty big cause for concern, and it sounds like growing larger as we incorporate more IT onto the OT networks. Yeah. There's one other factor prevalent across cybersecurity organizations, and that's the cyber skills gap. We're all looking for the best cybersecurity professionals. They're hard to find. They take a long time to train. They're difficult to retain once they're trained up. How do you see this impacting OT specifically?
Well, OT unfortunately gets hit with a double whammy here. First thing I want to say is your chances of recruiting an absolutely a perfect cyber analyst with 4 years experience in something that's only existed for 2 years. It's not going to happen.
It doesn't keep them from asking for it.
It's like winning the lottery, right?
Yeah, exactly, Mandy. It's not happening. Really, you're going to start cutting your cloth appropriately and realizing that you're going to have to take what you got and train them up yourselves, probably. And to be honest with you, the scale of the threat that we face, and I'm talking about the IT side here for a second, do you know what? You can't throw more people at it. You just simply can't throw more people at it.
Makes it worse. If they're unskilled or and you put more people, it could make the problem more challenging.
Where you get the double whammy on the OT side is all of a sudden you have engineers, OT engineers, meeting IT analysts. And the OT more or less aren't familiar with IT. And IT, often as not, I haven't got a clue about OT. And you can find OT teams suddenly put in charge of IT and IT security. And bear in mind, they're running systems where they've never had to worry about security, just the safety of the systems. And you sort of get IT teams in charge of, what the hell is this? What's a PLC? What's an HMI? And so, but OT gets a double whammy because they can end up getting their support from people who haven't been upskilled enough in the first place. But that's just the way things have turned out to be. So it's an issue for both IT and OT, but in OT, it's a bit of a double whammy.
Wow, interesting. Arun, are you feeling this?
Yes. In fact, you should be shaking my head violently. This.
Oh no, we lost Arun's connection.
Arun, you hit a button.
Darn, he'll jump back on. Carlton, do you have a thought?
I think I can pick up right where he was headed, because it's probably exactly the same situation. And that is that when it comes to the OT environment, one of the things that conversation I had about walled gardens, for the history of the development of the OT technology space, they have assumed that everything was safe behind the walled garden. So there's quite often very little control from a governance standpoint in the OT network. Especially when you talk about the VLANs dedicated to machine operations. And one of the things that is quite frightening in the cybersecurity space at this point is knowing that you're sitting there with that kind of legacy, and to the point of you don't fix that overnight because it's disruptive to your manufacturing operation. So we have a lot of work to do to begin to bolt on the normal security governance that you have in the IT network in the OT environment. And that's going to be a hill to climb, or even a mountain if you want to look at it from a pragmatic perspective about just how big it is, because there was a fully trusted network. They didn't concern themselves with cyber stuff. And more, the bad guys are figuring that out. I think that the impact on manufacturing organizations last year, I think, jumped 14%. And manufacturing was almost a non-target in the earlier years, but they're beginning to be a richer one, because you can shut those operational systems down pretty easily, and companies will pay through the nose to get them back online.
Right.
Well,
they're not highly fortified.
I think you bring up a really good point, Carlton. I mentioned the CIA triad, right? And that's very enterprise focused. It's in that order. But for OT, it's really AIC, right? Availability first. And as you look at risk, you have to think about risk with availability first. And that's a different lens than a lot of cybersecurity leaders take. And so you really have to look at it in the reverse. And how do you weigh your risk accordingly?
Yeah. And that fortification of that OT network needs to be done without bankrupting the organization by bringing production down. So it's a huge challenge. So, David, I've got one other thing that I need to ask, and that is this 5G. I mean, it's everywhere. It's the next thing. It's expanding quickly, and is cause for some concern on the IT cybersecurity front for sure. Is manufacturing OT also taking advantage of this new wireless technology already that you've seen along the customer base?
Yeah, absolutely, big time. It's the industrial Internet of Things. It's the sensors all around the plant. Using the internet to get the information back to the control room to tell you what's going on. The days of guys who looked a bit like me with my color hair wearing a lab coat and a clipboard, no offense, Mandy, but nearly always was a guy in the bad old days, going around with a clipboard and a stethoscope and listening to the machine, gone, right? Totally gone. You use an Internet of Things to get that information back because it's more efficient, it's faster, and it's probably more accurate. But that will be boosted and facilitated by 5G. It's coming in. Now, 5G, folks, is a good thing. It's going to be a good thing. Okay, the inherent encryption, and Carlton mentioned before about he's just going to encrypt everything. 5G, the encryption will be so much better with 5G. But what 5G does is makes that landscape that you try to defend, and Mandy brought up the subject of visibility earlier on, it's just so much more complicated because there are so many more interconnected devices, and you try to work out, remember the old NIST principle? You've got to identify and then you can protect. Well, look at the struggle you're now going to have trying to identify what it is you want to protect in the first place.
Right.
Facilitated by 5G. The other bit 5G is the speed at which attacks will take place will be phenomenal. An attack will kick off in Buenos Aires and it'll be causing mayhem in Boston within seconds. That's what 5G will bring to this. Increased interconnectedness, increased complexity, increased speed. Good, but the bad side is the threat actors can do their job so much more quicker and it's such greater scale.
Yeah. So I'm watching the time here. We're just about on our stop time, but I'd like to go a couple minutes over. So those of you who can stay, please do. I'd like to ask David, besides 5G then, what other technologies do you predict threat actors are going to be using in 2021? Okay,
as a company, we've been using AI to defend networks for 7 years. Stand by for the threat actors to be using AI. Mandy was touching on the human beings earlier on with people, process, and technology. And somebody said, yeah, it was you again, Mandy. You were talking about, there's somebody on the other side on the keyboard. With an AI attack, there will not be a human being. There will not be that human fallibility there. It will be AI that works out the best way to land on your network. AI will then sit there and work out the best way to hide itself. It will work out the best way to exploit living off the land and using your own network to do its damage. AI will actually, without having to know where it is and what it's doing, will be able to work out what is the most sensitive stuff I could find inside this network and encrypt, or more appropriately, steal first and then encrypt. And then it will sit there. There'll be no command and control. There'll be no going back to say, what do you want me to do next, boss? And then it will decide the most appropriate way by doing its own risk scores, working out its own risk scores while it's on your network to take that stuff off. And to be honest with you, that's absolutely terrifying because at that point, human beings can't fight AI.
Yeah, once it's at that point, us CISOs need to understand you can't bring a human to an AI fight, right?
But what you can bring is a solid response plan. So having the visibility of when something happens and being able to respond to it, you might not beat it, but you will stop it. So.
But the thing common between, sorry, my internet.
Stop it.
No problem.
It's can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I think the thing that about AI you got to watch is bias. So you can do everything, and the thing that you can see is the bias in the system. So that's something you have to also watch for, in addition to the normal things that David and you, Mandy, said, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Arun. And you popped off there a little bit, but you came right back on. Thanks for that. David, go ahead.
I was just going to say on bias, yeah, you're absolutely right. If you're going to use AI and you're running on training data sets, then there will be bias because you're running on a trained data set. But it's possible to use AI that doesn't rely on training data sets. Yep. And the training data set is basically your organization. So if there's bias, it's the bias of your organization.
There you go.
But something to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, David, for bringing these insights and sharing what you've seen out there with all of us here today. We are nearing the end of our time, and I want to quickly go over to the poll and see which prediction got the most votes. And it looks like a tie. I've not had a tie before. At 36% of the vote each, the IoT will be the root cause of a major privacy breach, is the first one. And within 3 to 5 years, passwords only authentication will. So that's Mandy's and Arun's. Is that, are those the two? And it was very close. It was only 2 votes off on your prediction, Carlton. So very good predictions all the way around. We're going to send a certificate of IT psychic to Mandy and Arun this time around. You're going to, they're worthy of framing. You're going to put it right next to your MBA on the wall. Update your LinkedIn profile. Congratulations to you both. That was a fantastic set of predictions today. Now, to everyone in our audience, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Keep an eye out on your inbox for a little token of appreciation from CXO Sync, and a special thank you to David Mason and Dark Trace for joining the conversation today. To our panelists, Carlton, it was a pleasure having you on the panel. Arun, thanks for joining us today and coming back on. And Mandy, we really appreciate all the insights you brought as well. I'm going to call that a wrap for CISO Online Manufacturing. I hope to see you back at a future webcast event. I'm Joseph Wolfgram. On behalf of CXO Sync and all of us here on the panel, I'll say goodbye for now.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.